Welcome, everyone. My name is Brett Gorman, which I realize I need to rename myself. Apologies for that. I think that happened on last week's webinar as well. And I'm the Director of High Performance Pathways on the USRowing HP team. I am joined by two distinguished individuals this evening. First up, we have our Chief High Performance Officer, Josy Verdonkschot, who is tuning in from the Netherlands. So, Josy, what is it, 2, 3 a.m. for you?
No,
No?
actually, we're good. We are already on winter time, which means that it's only 5 hours difference. It's 1 a.m.
Oh, way better. Great.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, thank you. We greatly appreciate you being here with us to go over kind of the team purpose and mission for U19s. And then running our back of the house this evening, we have Wendy Wilbur, another member of our HP team here. Wendy, would you like to come on and say hello?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, great. So first of all, before I forget, we would love to know who we have here with us. And we know that there are many stakeholder groups that are represented on this call. I think we had about 200 pre-registrations for this call, which is very exciting. And we would love to know, what percentage of athletes, parents, coaches, who we got. So Wendy has a little poll that she's going to go ahead and launch. So Wendy, go ahead when you're ready and we'll launch that poll. It's the only poll of the webinar. Thank you. So you could quickly just, indicate for if you're a U19 athlete or, a rower, coxswain, parent or guardian, if you're a youth coach, a collegiate coach, or a high performance coach representative. And then of course, other. I'm always curious, what's other? Who else do we have creeping in on our webinars? Oh, great. Oh, you guys are fast. This is an attentive group, Wendy. I like what I'm seeing here. We're only missing 12 people. We have 88% participation right now. Okay, so I am going to end the poll in 3, 2, 1. Awesome, great. All right, so lots of parents, lots of, we got between, I'd say between athletes, between rowers and coxswains. I'm not saying that coxswains are not athletes. All athletes, but coxswains, rowers, pretty equal with parents. We've got some coaches. Looks like we've got a couple college coaches on and a couple others, which will now keep me up tonight. Who are the others? What stakeholder group? I'll have to think through that. But thank you very much. That helps us out a lot. Without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started. The program should last just under an hour. There is a Q&A function that Wendy will be monitoring. She knows the slides. She's seen them before. So if you ask a question that she knows is not going to be addressed later on, she will interrupt me and we'll go ahead and ask that. I'm sure that we'll go on some tangents. These things never go 100% to plan, but given that we did this with the U23 stakeholder group just a week ago, I think we'll get it pretty dialed in. So what we're going to cover today is a little bit of U19 team purpose of goals. We're going to talk through the athlete ID and the talent characteristics document that was included in the 2019 selection procedures for those of you that had a chance to look over those. We're going to talk through some of the changes from 2024 and explain the reasoning behind them. And then we're actually going to spend a little bit of extra time going through the U19 trials and kind of a little bit of an update on how the additions of time standards, that's competitive standard times, to the trials process, how that's going. We did it in 2023 and 2024, so now we have 2 years of data to kind of show how is that affecting our performance at the World Rowing Championship. Okay. So next, we're going to start with the purpose and mission. Why do we even have a U19 national team? And something that I wanted to go over before we delved into that was that for those of you that may not know this, is that it wasn't until 2023 that the U19 national team was formally brought under the HP umbrella at USRowing. For those of you that may not know this, the USRowing is kind of split into two halves. We have the high performance side of things, and that houses our Olympic team. That's Josy is chief boss man on that side. Yep, for all our previously it was just senior team, Olympic team, and U23. And U19 actually existed on the domestic side and in a lot of ways operated as its own system. Oh, great. There were a lot of great things that came out of this pre-2023. Lots of medals, great coaches coming through, really good leadership, but it didn't have a formal connection to what we're now calling the pathway. The under 23 team, the senior team, the Olympic team, and we really weren't doing athlete tracking all the way through. Josy came on board in 2022, and in 2023, the U19 formally became part of the pathway, And we announced just over a year ago the introduction of the Pathways program and my appointment to the role of Director of High Performance Pathways. So I just bring that up because, in a lot of ways, we're kind of in our infancy of truly having a cohesive pathway where athletes are hopefully going to be moving from U19, U23, and senior team with purpose. We've had examples of athletes. I myself went through all of those layers as an athlete. Our men's 4 that just won Olympic gold, all of them were on the U19 team and the U23 team. So we've definitely had athletes progress, but it wasn't something that we were intentionally tracking like we are now. So I thought that was an important part to start with. And actually, Josy, I didn't prep you for this question, but can you give us a little insight on why you thought that was important?
Well, probably don't need preparation for that. If you look at it, I think that it doesn't make sense if there's not a connection, because looking at representing the United States at the international level, it's obviously for many people it's kind of their dream, but their biggest dream is the Olympics. And why not connect from step 1, going to under 19 Worlds, to the final step and see it as one pathway? It doesn't make sense not to do it. Simple.
Great, thanks, Josy. All right, great. So let's delve into a little bit of the purpose of the U19 national team. And I want to draw a distinction here between the U19 system and U19 national team, because as we know, USRowing offers many different camps, many different options. We're going to be running 14 ID camps from January to early March for the U19 athletes. We're going to be running 2 high performance winter camps. This summer, we will have 3 layers of camps that will include the Pathways Development Camp, formerly known as Youth Development Camp, the Selection Development Camp, and then of course, the Selection Camp. We do have a webinar that will be coming up 2 weeks from tonight, November 13th, and that will be going into all the different camp options, their specific purpose, what athletes should be targeting, which camps, etc. This one, we're really just focusing on that top layer, or those athletes that are really prepared for international competition. And that is how we're defining the U19 national team, as athletes who are ready for international competition. And I'll get a little bit more into that later. But the purpose of that is to ID who those athletes are that have the physiological, the mental capabilities to perform well, not just at U19, but potentially at U23 senior Olympic level. Experience, providing those athletes with the resources, the training to then go and have that international competition experience because they're developmentally ready for it at the under 19 World Rowing Championships, which for 2025 will be in Trakai, Lithuania. And third, the opportunity, how are we creating not just one pathway, selection camp, but how are we providing different ways for different types of athletes to demonstrate that they are at that international caliber? Because there are outliers. We can point to lots of outliers all throughout our sport and in many sports of people who maybe didn't fit the mold of, let's describe exactly what an 18-year-old ready to compete at the international level looks like. There are people who already do that don't necessarily fill that. So that's part of the purpose of the U19 as well, is to make sure we're creating opportunity that will cover them as well. Once ID'd, and this is the exact same slide that we showed to the under 23s last week. Once ID'd, what are the goals? What are we trying to achieve with the under 19 national team? Where we want to expose them to what Josy's doing at the highest level with the senior athletes. And this is the part of my job that I'm super passionate about and love doing, is love knowing what's going on with the senior Olympic level and how can we scale that for U19. It's obviously not exactly the same. We're not doing the exact same training volume, but in terms of how we select athletes, how should we select boats, the testing we do. We've worked really hard over the last 2 years, or really just the last year that I've been involved, to try to make that a uniform system so that when athletes move through those levels, they're familiar because they've been doing it already. We want to track those athletes as they move through U19, go into college, and are in the under 23 space. And then, of course, that key post-collegiate, what I refer to as kind of that transition for athletes that are maybe going to high performance clubs, or maybe they're going to one of our national team training centers. The third one, and this we're going to be talking about quite a bit later in the presentation, is performing in the top half of the field at the World Rowing Championships, which we're defining as 95% of the gold medals, or not the gold medal standard, of standard. And we'll talk about that on the next slide. So I have a little back and forth here where I'm going to pretend to be a U19 athlete and ask Josy some questions. So this first one is, why the emphasis on 95% CST? Because Josy, isn't any international experience important, even if you're not at 95%? Like, won't that help develop as many athletes as possible?
Well, without being impolite, I would say that it's not my ambition to teach people how to lose. If you look at a standard and what we try to achieve with 95%, that is that your racing experience is you are within the competition and you're not an outlier in the competition. And from my perspective, any experience should be at the right level. So if you're not ready for that level, it's not really a positive experience. It's just the checklist. I've done this. And according to me, part of learning is learning how to race, but also learning how to race to win. And well, it's not about winning the final, but just qualifying for the next round, etc., etc. So being in a tournament is important, and being there, that's more tourism, I would say, and that's not what I think is the ambition of high performance.
Yeah. And I think I'll just add to that, having been at U23 and U19 World Championships, that we want to prepare people for the level and understand what that speed looks like, because I think many of us that have been at World Championships have seen before when a boat comes off the water after the heat and it's just like, oh wow, like this is fast, like it's another level, and we want to do everything we can to prepare them and manage and make sure everyone understands the level and what the expectations are. So now we're going to get into the talent characteristics, kind of what are we looking for. As I mentioned before, the U19 selection procedures did include a link to Josy's talent characteristics document, which Josy, I've seen it multiple times on different coach presentations that you've given before. You've definitely presented it to the level 3 coaches before. So we're going to go through that a little bit and give Josy a chance to explain that. I did add, this is a new slide from last week. Just wanted to put a little disclaimer on here that the metrics that we're about to go over, for a lot of people, I think their eyes are going to get big and, oh my gosh, like that is a really, really high standard. And it's based on a podium finish at the Olympic level competition. And then we scale back each year from the podium finish. So you'll see at the top, when I go to the next slide, it'll say like P-4, which basically means podium -4. And I think the metrics are not meant as everybody needs to be at this level if you're even going to think about going to the U19 World Championships via trials or coming to camp, but they are metrics and guidelines that we can use in the absence of other data. And that other data could include water results. Just today, Josy and I were emailing back and forth about a U19 athlete who's doing well in domestic competition, is tall, but does not have the ERG score that we're about to show you. And is this someone we should be considering for selection camp? And water results are something that are really important. The more familiarity we have with an athlete, the better decision we could make. Josy, am I capturing this?
Yeah, you are.
Oh, good. Thank you.
I don't know whether you want me to explain a little bit about the next page, but it's totally right what you say. It's not about if you don't meet this, you will not be on the podium. It's more the less information we have of people. So if you know nothing, probably an ERG score or knowing how tall somebody is or knowing what is somebody's maximum oxygen uptake is probably a good indication of the probability that somebody will make it. And all those factors become less important in the end when you start to compete and when you are racing in boats. However, we have to understand that when we look at boat results, it's not just the result at one point in time, but it's also the progression. So that's why there's like different levels. In the end, boat results, boat speed is the most important part of that in predicting whether somebody will be at the highest level. But if we look back, if we look at our population, if we look at people that have been to the podium, in general, those were like markers that had a very high probability in predicting whether somebody made it or not.
Good.
So when we look at this, obviously, performance in a small boat is a huge indication. Training, it's not that I expect people to train so much, but it's more to say, well, if we assume that somebody at the Olympic level would train 21 hours a week, so what would it mean when you are like starting to train? Do you need to train 21 hours a week? I would say no, because you need to progress over years and you will reach that number at a certain point. And it's not that if you start doing that right now, that you will, that's healthy in any case. I think that a healthy development means that you go step by step, do a little bit more every year, because that's how you improve. Length, arm length, span are important in predicting maximum oxygen uptake, strength markers, erg scores, short distance, long distance, and in the end, boat speed in single, double, or pair. Those are the markers. If we start at top 3 at the Olympics, it's X, and then you can walk down in percentage, and then you can go to the next page and you can translate those percentages to numbers that would be adequate for your level. So when we talk about under 19, I would say that's somewhere around P6, P-6, P-7, and if could be that it'll take you about 20 years to get there. Could be that it takes 4 years to get there, because it's not that everybody's got the same speed of development, and could be that you would never get there. But it's just look at yourself, but not just in where you are today, but look at yourself also in how are you progressing. And as a coach, look how your athletes are progressing. And I'm more impressed by somebody who's improving every year, not so much by the absolute score, because the absolute score, I mean, some people, was a Greek girl as a junior, she did, what was it, 6:23? Sofia Asumunaki, 19 years old, got recruited by Washington, obviously, but I mean, 6:23 for a 19-year-old is pretty good. And she did it when she was under 19, so as an 18-year-old. But we cannot expect everybody to do that. And actually, she never got a medal at the Olympics. So it's not that the number is kind of a proof that you will make it, but its predictability is a little bit higher. But in the end, we will look at boat speed.
Great. And I did want to make just one comment. There are several, there are lots of, especially on the slide that was previous to this, where it talks about, erg, strength, different things. Now, I just wanted to note that we recognize that for a lot of U19s and U23s, that the testing they do, there are certain tests that are required for under 19 team, and that's the 2K and the 6K. We do require those tests. But if you're not already doing the 1 rep max squat test within your program, we don't expect, it's not safe for people to just go out and start doing those on their own. They should definitely have guidance on that. That was a note from our U19 head coaches, that to make sure I pointed that out, that and saying we know not everyone has the access to the VO2 max scores. These are the types of things that we are doing, however, at the senior team level, especially the lactate step test is one that we're doing at all levels of national team at this point. But that was just something I wanted to make sure that I mentioned, that someone didn't look at this slide and say, oh, I need to go do 1 rep maxes tomorrow, because that might not be in their best interest.
Yeah. About the step test that you said, not every test is meant to be saying you're good or bad. Huh? Many tests are just to be clever about how you train, to define training zones. And even the strength testing, there's many ways to test somebody's strength. And if you would do 10 repetitions at a certain weight, and 1 year later you can do 10 repetitions at a higher weight, you can assume that you improved. That's basically what you're looking for.
Wendy, have we had any questions come in regarding talent ID and characteristics?
There's
one
one question. Yeah, I can.
Oh, can you see it, Josy?
Yeah. Well, David, so the question is whether USRowing has deconstructed the actual pathways of current successful senior national team athletes, and the answer is partly. What we're doing now is reconstructing the pathway of the current athletes, but in the past I did this with a very long history of rowing that I have. I did this with the results of international athletes in different countries, and so those parameters are basically based upon successful athletes at the Olympic level for more than just the US. So currently we are trying to actualize those numbers a little bit by our current athletes, but we lack the systematic approach of the past, or actually we are bringing in the systematic approach, and we are trying to dig in the past to get as much of our history together as possible.
We've actually had quite a few questions come in, so I'll go ahead and feed some of these to you, Josy, if you're okay with that.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Why 6K versus 5K? This is a question I get pretty often in my role.
Yeah. Why 5K instead of 6K?
Why 6K instead of 5K?
No, I reverse it.
Oh, you're being clever. Okay.
No, I'm not clever. I just try to. I'm just stalling to before I start talking. No. So the argument of 6K is more or less you want a distance a little bit longer, and if you look at how the test now is, you've got 2K is, let's say, 6 to 7 minutes. 6K is more or less like 20 to 24 minutes. If you look at training zones, a 6K is just above what people could sustain for, let's say, 3 times a quarter of an hour, etc. So it's just above what people would call maximum lactate steady state. It's just above threshold. And so as an indication, compared to the training zones where we talk about, it is a little bit more valid than a 5K, which is more limited in time. It's also something that's where there's more literature about. If you talk about power distance protocol, which means take your distance that you do and then look at the power you generate, and then you create a curve by doing a 1 minute and a 2K and a 6K, you get a kind of curve. And that curve is an indication of the profile of people. Well, internationally, there's much more to be said about a 6K and doing 5 tests. There would also be a 1 hour test to complete your profile. And if you look at reasons why people in the past do a 5K or 6K or 20 minutes, it's just tradition. So why not all do the same is the answer. And that's why we have chosen for 6K.
Great. Awesome. There's some other questions here that I think I'll take, like the down here we have. So on this chart currently shown, where's the division line on P8 through P5 for selection camp and selection development camp? We're going to cover selection development camp qualifications on the webinar in 2 weeks. This is purely just for selection camp here. We're not drawing a distinction for selection development camp.
Yeah, and again, and the line is arbitrary because a very lean 615 or 625 to my account, or 630 that beats the shit out of everybody in the single, and has improved in the single because last year he didn't or she didn't make a final. It's probably he in this case because it's at 625 anyway. You know, it's part of it. I would say that yes, of course, ERG scores might be important, but in the end, we need to get away from making it too one-dimensional. We need to look at more dimensions. There's more in being a high-performance athlete. It's strength, it's fitness, it's speed, it's technique, it's mental. It's distinguish yourself in how you are able to perform under stress, and how how well you can learn. Those things are important and are not easy to be captured in numbers. What we did is we combined the research about pathways and put it in those numbers. And we love the numbers as coaches, but in the end, we have to understand that although we love them, they're not like holy. There's many other criteria that are of importance. They are not as measurable, so we can't put them in a chart, but they have the same importance.
Great, thank you. There was a question in the Q&A also about how do these qualifications apply and change for coxswains. So to be clear, there are no scores for coxswains that we utilize. On the webinar in 2 weeks, we will be talking about coxswain qualifications for both selection camp and how selection development camp and pathways development camp and how we're going to be running that. And we will be also updating the website for that. And just so everyone's aware, on a later slide, I talk about this. It is not, the pool is getting smaller for selection camp because the Cox 4 we are anticipating will no longer be an event, but I will talk about that a little bit later. Josy, were there any other comments you wanted to make about talent characteristics before we moved on?
Nope.
All right, great, okay. I think we've talked enough about the outliers and that there are more factors that need to be considered. So I think we can skip ahead to that. All right, let's go into the changes from 2024 to the 2025 selection procedures and some of the things that people should be ready for. So what's different? The three main things that I want to bring everyone's attention to are that we are adding time standards for camp boats. So we're 2 years into time standards for trials boats. We did that in 2023 and 2024, and we're just simply adding that into the camp boats as well. And I'll be asking Josy for the justification for that in just 1 second. We are anticipating some updates to the World Rowing program. In the Cox 4, we are fully anticipating will no longer be an event for both the under 23 and the under 19 World Championships. As such, we are migrating the Coxless 4 from a trials boat to a camp boat. Okay. The trials timeline is not different from 2023. It's very similar to how we ran it in 2023 with trials occurring just after the Youth National Championships, but it is a departure from 2024 where because the World Rowing Championship for under 19 and U23 was a combined championship that was later in August, we had the ability to move trials into July and still have plenty of time to run selection camp. More on that to come. So first, camp time standards coming in, and these are the time standards. These are all in the selection procedures and detailed in there. So 95% is the same time standard that we're going to be using for camp boats. How this is going to work at camp is that we're anticipating that selection camp is going to get started right around June 23rd, about a week after the Youth National Championship. And then the boats will come together. We'll select the 8, the 4, and the quad. And then between July 14th and the 17th, so ahead of the World Rowing entry deadline, the boats need to achieve the 95% performance standard. And we will be following the exact same process that we have outlined for the trials boats. That's all outlined in the selection procedures. And then after that, the team will be formally named for everyone that makes 95%. So Josy, why are we doing this? Why are we adding time standards to the camp boats?
Well, there's 2 good reasons for that. The first one is you have to be just, which means if you set standards for people in a small boat, you should apply the same standards for people in a big boat. Mm-hmm. That's one part of it. And the other part is people should be aware in all cases, this is how it works. In high performance, you have to perform when it counts, and you have to be able to produce that performance when asked, so deliver. And as you know, and probably this is also something that's of importance. So let's say boats don't meet the standard during trials. I wouldn't exclude that during the selection camp, people would have the opportunity to try to qualify in that same boat class when they, so let's say a pair, or let's say a single. If a single would not be fast enough on trials, it's not that during selection camp you can just appoint a single. That would not be fair. You have to ask the same standard. So those are the two main reasons.
Great, thank you. Great. So now we're going to get a little bit further into, in particular, with trial boats are going to work for 2025, and talking a little bit about, assessing CST and how's that going over now that we're coming up on year 3 with assessing that. Yeah, a question just came in. Yes, standard is 95% of CST. 95% of CST. And I know that can be confusing at times. It's all laid out in the selection procedures. So we posted, speaking of selection procedures, and Wendy was kind enough to put the link to these in the chat. We posted them along with the press release on Thursday, the 10th, and then we had a 2-week comment period. And now we're sending those comments to the high performance committee for final review, and we will announce the finalized procedures in the coming weeks. Okay, we did receive some comments, not a ton. They were a little bit all over the place, but just so everyone's aware, I don't anticipate there being major changes, but we will finalize them after the high performance committee has a chance to review all of the comments that were sent in. So the proposed trials plan, it will be Tuesday, June 17th in Sarasota. The 16th of June will be for practice. Again, this is very similar to what was done in 2023, 2 years ago. We will have an AM time trial with PM finals. The events that will be up for grabs at trials are the single, the double, and the pair. As I mentioned, the 4 is being moved to camp with the elimination of the Cox 4 from the World Rowing Program. Time standard is 95% of CST. And as Josy just alluded to in his previous answer, this was in the procedures for 2024 as well, but we highlighted a little bit more this year to let people know that non-qualified boats from trials do have the option that we could move them to camp. So as Josy was saying, in the event that, say, a double or a pair does not qualify, but we feel that we have enough talent at camp in order to create a boat, we do have the ability to do that at camp, of course, with Josy's blessing and assuming that it's not going to disrupt other boats. Josy, do you want to comment on what kind of things would you want to see to move a boat from that doesn't qualify at trials into camp?
Yeah. You have to make a distinction. First of all, it's not my objective to move all the events to the camp. Yep. Actually, I would encourage people who have talented athletes and who have their own combination, especially when you've got a double or a pair, to try out for trials, because in the end, it's very constructive. It is focusing on what I want, the small boats, and it's a challenge, and it gives us racing, which is also important. Then, but now let's say the level of the trials is not good enough. There's 2 things. First of all, we could move the event to the camp. Maybe we think that from the people that are invited to the camp, we can make a really good pair or a really good double. Why not? And why not prioritize that? There's no reason not to do that unless somebody was qualified beforehand. The other thing that one should realize, that's a consequence. Obviously, we have to watch closely to the people that are participating in trials. And so let's say there's somebody who qualifies and there's somebody who's number 2. I also want to have the opportunity to invite those people to camp. And because that's, again, we do not have enough opportunity to show our speed in small boats. I totally encourage it, but I also want to incentivize it in a way that, yeah, sure, good results, even if somebody else qualifies, but still could lead to an invitation to selection camp. So was that enough explanation of what you asked me? Because I went a little bit different direction.
No, I think that was great, and I think it actually piggybacks into one of the questions that just came into the Q&A. That if another, and you answered this in a slightly different way, but the question was if a boat class is added to camp, doesn't qualify through trials, would that open up more selection seats? But what I just heard you say was that even if that didn't happen, even if a boat did qualify, if that boat performed a really high standard and the second place boat or maybe even the third place boat had really high quality athletes that were also good, that yes, we would then open up selection camp spots.
Yes.
Yes, yeah. And that is listed in the selection procedures, that there's an invitation timeline in there for selection camp, because we are going to be making invitations to the camp a lot earlier so that athletes can plan, and athletes that aren't invited can then prioritize trials if they wish to do that. But it does say in there as well that based on trials results, USRowing will extend additional invitations.
Yeah, and to answer the first question, it's not necessary to attend the trials if you are already invited to selection camp. However,
yes, it's not required.
If you are invited, you're always free to participate, but there's totally not an obligation to do that.
Correct. Yeah, trials is not, you don't have to do trials to go to selection camp. That is correct. Great. All right. Awesome. We'll go on. All right, just, I think we did get some comments about the trials being 2 days after the completion of the Youth National Championship, so just giving a little bit of a glimpse on why we settle on this dates. Location, a lot of athletes will already be in Sarasota. Last year, when we had trials for 2024 in a different location later, we had it on Mercer in New Jersey in July. We actually received a lot of feedback from the U19 community that we were creating some additional barriers, that having, especially from our West Coast crews, that a whole trailer coming, another trailer trip, another airplane flight was actually a bigger barrier than doing it right after, and why we're rechanging it. So that was definitely part of the reason. The physiological reasons, periodization, athletes are already peaking right for youth nationals. So 48 hours of recovery and then racing again, we feel that CST is still achievable. Pre-camp, this is something I feel very firmly on, that we're creating multiple opportunities. So it's very important that we complete trials prior to the start of selection camp, so that we can extend additional invitations to selection camp, so that athletes have multiple opportunities to make the team. If trials doesn't work out, they can still come to camp, things like that. Josy, do you have comments on any of these 3 bullets?
No, not on those bullets. I have a comment on the question whether this is recorded. Yes, this is recorded. The link will be sent out.
Thank you, Josy. Great. And to the person that just asked the question about, how will Cox be selected, we will be covering that on the webinar in 2 weeks. So please tune in. 2 weeks from today, we have specific Camp U19 webinar coming up. Okay. Because we know we're going to need more time for that. All right. In the press release, it stated that the trials date was designed to encourage athletes to prioritize small boats in the spring. How is this possible if you row for a program that prioritizes bigger boats? You're in a program that focuses on the quad, focuses on the 8, focuses on the Cox 4, the straight 4. How is that possible? So U19 is a different position than U23. For the U23 team, pretty much 99.9% of the collegiate athletes are only in 8s and 4s, and none of them are sculling, except for, of course, some of our club athletes from the ACRA schools. But at the U19 level, it is possible for a lot of people, not everyone, I'll get to that, to be in singles, to be in doubles, to be in pairs. So we would love to see that, because athletes have the ability many times, depending on their program structure, to be able to row those boats all spring. If we're going to be more competitive at an international level in these small boats, it can't be an afterthought. It can't be, oh, my season's over, now I'm going to hop in a small boat and go for trials. We want athletes to plan ahead and to think about that and have those conversations with their coaches to see if trials might work for them. I would say if you're an athlete that's part of a program that prioritizes those big boats, 2 things. Either can you, be rowing the boat in the fall and the winter and get in it as much as possible in the spring, whether it's for your recovery rows, your steady state rows once a week. Can you be coordinating that with your coach? If so, great. If not, camp is still an option for you. And it might not be the perfect plan you want and the perfect pathway, but we do have multiple pathways. So that was definitely something I wanted to note. Josy, any comments on that?
Yeah. What I wanted to say, I listened to you and you say there's different pathways. Actually, there's one pathway, but there's different roads that lead to Rome.
Okay.
And the different roads that lead to to the team. Just look at it from your own perspective as a coach or as an athlete. basically you want the best possible athlete. Being able to row a small boat is a skill that, you know, is very important. However, you have to look at the possibilities that a club can offer. If your club doesn't have the small boats, if there's not enough coaching capacity, it's obvious that choices are made. But so it's not that we tell people, okay, you have to do this, but we do think it's important if possible. That's my point of view.
Great. Thank you. I'm just correcting a typo that I just had in. Great. All right. Awesome. Thank you, Josy. Great. All right. I know, this is very typical. We're getting some coxswain questions. I'm just going to say it again, the webinar link that I just put in the chat, we will be talking more about coxswains for that one. This is really just overall team mission. It's not coxswain specific, just so everyone's clear. Okay. Great. Here's a couple questions. I've gotten 1 or 2 comments about this. Is US Rowing concerned about the heat humidity in Sarasota? Will CST be adjusted? Okay. So as we've talked about, the standard is 95% of CST under neutral or favorable wind conditions. This is directly from the procedures, and a water temperature of 7 degrees Fahrenheit or higher, which Sarasota, I'm sure, will be at. I don't think we have to worry about that. The committee will evaluate wind and water conditions and will adapt the required trial standards accordingly, which we've done that both of the previous 2 years. The committee has done that, and we've actually lowered it to 94% both times due to conditions. And so I want to talk a little bit now about what has that looked like for those of you that may be considering trials and haven't been a part of it the last 2 years. So 2023, as I've mentioned a few times, was in Sarasota, very similar formatting to what we will be doing for 2025. The CST was adjusted in 94% to 94%, and 6 U19 boats qualified and met that standard. In 2024 at Mercer, the CST was also adjusted to 94%, and 3 U19 boats qualified for Worlds. So now this slide shows how those boats performed. So first we have on the left, we have the 2023 trials boats that qualified. On the right, we have the 2024 trials boats that qualified. The center column is what percentage they went at trial of CST, what percent of CST was 94%. And there you have what percentage they went. So for example, in 2023, the junior men's single went 95.2. So actually cleared it by over a percentage, given that we had adjusted it to 94. The third column says what the world rowing result was, what placement they were, and then in parentheses, I have how many entries there were in those events. So I'm just going to let everyone kind of look that over and see, this is how those boats did after meeting standard and how they performed at the World Championships. I mentioned previously that our goal is that we're competing in the top 50% of the field. So I bring this up not because I'm trying to rub it in, these boats weren't in A finals, because actually several of these boats I think performed very, very well. I'll highlight the junior men's pair from 2024. But again, they weren't over, the standard was 94. They were 95.3 and they won the B final. They just missed that A final and put in a very good performance. We had our junior women's single in 2023 in the top half of the field. Again, she went 94.5% when the standard was 94. But 95%, I think a lot of people look at that and they're thinking, oh my gosh, the standard is really, really high. But then when we're looking at how boats are performing at the World Championships, we're still in the bulk of the events, we're still not quite in the top 50% of the field. So again, having that 95% is super important to prepare people for the level that they're going to see at the World Rowing Championships. And Josy, again, I didn't tell you I was going to come to you after this slide, but any comments?
Yeah, no. So people shouldn't think that I look negatively at those results. Like Brad says, a single, Jacob Prehol at the Olympics, everybody is very enthusiastic because he rode the fastest time ever for American in single, and he did great. And he had a little bit of bad luck. He could have been in the A final, but he had a very tough quarterfinal, and he ended up in the C final, so he came in 13th. Sometimes the level is not really an indication of the ultimate placement is not an indication, because you also have to look at how deep a field is. And yeah, obviously some of the fields, specifically the smaller boats, are deeper than some of the big boats. So it's a higher competition. And so if all those boats are competing to be in the semi-final, or if they reach the semi-final, I'm pretty happy about that. And yeah, so And I think it's a positive experience. And now you could say, yeah, but so why don't you send any boat? Well, it should do justice. You should aim at the right level. So from my point of view, I would say all those boats have earned their right because they met a certain standard. Sometimes one cannot say, yeah, but I won trials. If there's only one boat, I don't call it a victory. I think you should hold yourself. Also because we know it is very, uh, it's impactful, it's expensive, and it should be a positive experience, a positive learning experience. And that means that you should be racing within the field. And yeah, so that's what I wanted to add. And again, those results that we see here, they are not optimal, maybe not what you want to see, but I argue that probably somebody with a really great performance in the single as an athlete might be a bigger talent than some people who had much bigger, better result in a big boat. And if you talk about future and prognostics, there's very high correlation between people who are very fast in small boats at these levels and have the right, attitude and then perform at the highest level.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, we look at everything, and this table shows us a lot, but doesn't necessarily show us everything. And I think similarly, when I look at the World Championships from 2024, and we had the benefit of not just having U19 boats, but U23 boats and senior team boats. One performance that I always like to highlight as one of the best ones was our lightweight men's senior single, who Sam went 97% at trials and had an amazing A final and came in fourth. And I think it's easy to think of that as like, not the result we wanted, not a great result, but it was an amazing race. And I think Josy, I don't know if you want to make any comments about that. It was quite a performance.
It was a good performance, and it exactly says what we expect people to be. 97% is in the range of A finals, and that we lowered the standard. So basically, his 97 was 3% above the cut. So look at that. If you go 10 seconds faster, 12 seconds faster than what we put up as a standard, you might even be in contention for a medal. And I'm not snobbish about that. I'm not trying to say that it's very slow when you're slower than that, but just we have to imagine that to compete at the highest level is not just about participation, but knowing what level you're aiming for is part of the lessons to learn.
Great. Thank you. I see that we have a couple of questions in the chat. I'm actually going to hold because I've got one more slide before I get to the Q&A section. So I'm going to hold on those until I get there. Okay. So just, and part of the reason I'm going over CST so much is because it's also part of camp. So like, for example, someone just put in the Q&A, like, a lot of this is talking about trials and the small boats, but what about the big boats? And, the CST process is going to be the same at camp. And I think it's really important that everyone understand it. So I will get to the questions in the Q&A, but just wanted to highlight, again, year 3 of time standards now also being added to camp and how this process is going to work. So this is specific to trials, but it's very similar to how it's going to work for camp. One thing that we're going to be adding, it's been requested to provide more clarity, more transparency about how we assess the CST, how our weather conditions going to be factored in. So upon registering for trials, this will also be part of selection camp. Upon registering for trials, though, everyone will be made aware of a mandatory one boat representative. Everyone needs to have a representative from their boat, whether it's a coach or a member of the crew, who comes to a Zoom a couple weeks before. So right after the entry deadline, we will host a Zoom where the CST committee, and I'm sure I will be there, Josy, I'm sure I will ask you to be there, to talk through how are we assessing CST? What are we expecting in Sarasota? How is that going to be handled? So that will be the Zoom call. The day before racing begins, so Monday the 16th, there will be a coach athlete meeting, and the regatta director and a representative of the CST committee will be on hand to, again, reinforce how they're going to be looking at the weather the next day, what the anticipated weather looks like, and how they plan to adjust it. And then on the day of racing, minimally an hour before the final, the CST committee will make a determination on if the standard's going to be adjusted, and if so, by how much, and that will be made available to all coaches and athletes at the regatta. And we'll be following that same protocol at selection camp. Okay.
Yeah.
Any comments, Josy?
Not about this.
Okay, great. All right, I've got two questions in the chat here. So the first one, will past trials results help in achieving a selection invite? Josy, do you want to handle that, or would you like me to do that one?
It's part of criteria for invitation, looking at past results, specifically smaller boat results. So yes, it will be taken into consideration.
Yes, definitely. I'd say I'm going to use a phrase that our U19 men's selection camp coach Eric Gerke uses a lot: body of work. What's the body of work? And when you're coming into camp or getting assessed for invitation for a camp, your body of work is what will matter, and that includes race results. Especially in small boats. I think something that we're trying to move away from is Josy, I'm going to ask you to comment on this because this is something I know we talked about a lot last year when we were doing invitations. How much should someone that rows in eights, like programs that exclusively rows in eights and quads and things like that, how much should those spring results matter, or those results? Like we just had the Charles, how much do those results matter in the big boats for getting a selection camp invite?
Yeah. So being part of a good program is very important, but I would say that in those cases we have to rely on coaches' recommendations as well, very much, because being part of a grade 8 doesn't mean that you're the greatest rower. It could be that your colleagues are very good, and it's also on the other hand, it's also a skill that we want to value, because we've had good results in eights in the past, and we shouldn't be afraid to keep those results like that. So to find the middle of the road, of not just to look at ERG scores and to emphasize that there's other things, don't be afraid that we will just look at small boats, because many of you are not able to integrate that in their program. Okay, but then we rely on physiological characteristics, because an ERG score is an ERG score, but how did your ERG score develop in time? How tall are you? Could be a marker, and good recommendation of your coach, because that's important, because the person that works with you every day, or show yourself at an ID day, because you have to understand that if you don't want to make it just a one-dimensional choice, okay, good ERG, you're in, but look at more things and also look at the future. We have to work with what we get. Coach's recommendation is 1, scores of the past is 2, and being part of good program basically helps, because your results in the big boats are not disregarded, but just difficult to weigh.
Excellent. Yeah, and I went ahead, I put our U19 men's and women's head coaches, Caitlin McLean and Eric Gerke. I've put their emails in here. We will definitely be getting into selection camp criteria and what we're looking for. Same for HP Winter Camp, which I see there's a question in the Q&A about if athletes don't have quite the metrics, will they be invited? We will be going over the range. There definitely will be a range. So just to give you an idea, HP Winter Camp, we have 2 in January. They're both over weekends, mimic same camps, but to get more athletes in, 60 per camp, so 120 athletes. We're only looking to invite, depending on how trials goes, between 20 to 25 per gender for selection camp. So definitely the criteria for winter camp is not going to be is not going to be quite as high. The standard for that is not going to be quite as high as it is for selection camp, but that winter camp is an opportunity to distinguish yourself as an individual. We will be rowing a lot of small boats there. Great, I answered that live. So I'm glad that someone asked the following question, Josy, because I think this came to me also through the comments on the selection procedures. Can you explain how you calculate CST? For example, the CST for the junior women's pair is better than the World Championships best time.
Yeah, sure. If you look at how to get to a standard time, you could look at results. However, for under 19, the only times that are taken into account for what they call world best times are basically it's championships records. So it's not a real good indication. Plus, to just take one example of an event, if you look at last year's World Championships in Canada, if the weather is right and if the people are right, then suddenly at under 23 or under 19, you get extremely fast times, who are as fast as the elite level. I think it was the under 23 men's single who was within a second of the world best for the senior single. For the senior single, it was the lightweight women's double, who was just a couple of tenths of the seconds of the world best for the elite Olympic lightweight women's double, 6:41, which is extremely fast. So if you look at that, it's a little bit by chance how quick those world champs times are. So if you want to make it simpler, you can just look at, okay, if I scale it down from what I should expect at the Olympic level, I can just look at averages of the world best times for the different categories and compare them to the averages. And I don't look at the outliers. I don't look at the extremely fast or extremely slow. You get to the time standard for under 19. So under 19 is a time standard that is derived of the and has is derived as a percentage of the time standard for the elite level, just to take the outliers out. And then the next step is 95% of that is basically like 20 seconds slower than what we expect of somebody around. But since I would argue, I can check the under 19 women's pair, by the way, but sometimes it's just that there was no opportunity. But maybe 1 year later, it's like the para. They introduced PR3 doubles, and I told Alan Minsler, who was director for high performance for para, well, probably within a year it will be 15 seconds faster, and it was 20 seconds faster within 1 year, just because of the fact that people were focusing on that competition and there were more options to roll those times. So is that enough explanation, Brad?
I think so. And I think, I encourage that person that please feel free to email us directly if you want. Josy is very responsive over email. So please feel free to email us directly if you want to continue that discussion, because it's we want to have the right standard. So if you feel that it's too fast, we want to know why. I think we are going to go a couple minutes over. Oh, yes. Did you have something, Josy?
No, go ahead.
Okay. There are a couple questions here I do want to get to, so we are going to go a couple minutes over. Of course, if you're good and you feel like you got the information you wanted, please feel free to hop off, but we will keep recording and we will just go for maybe another 5 minutes just to get these last couple questions in, because there are a couple that I want to make sure we get to. So someone asked, if a boat qualifies at trials, can the boat continue training privately, or is selection camp mandatory next step? It is not mandatory. We want athletes to qualify. If athletes qualify through trials and their best setup is to be at their home place and training with their, you name a coach, you're training at your home club, great, go for it. We want to do that. I do want to offer up the option that we did offer this last year to all of our trials winners, that boats that qualify and want to come to Chula Vista and want to be with the camp, because it is helpful to be surrounded by other boats who are, going that speed, and you can compare CSTs. How are we all doing? How far off gold medal standard are we? That will be something that we will be offering as an option, but more to come on that later. Which other one should we prioritize? Registration for trials and applying for selection camp. Selection camp, we'll be going over all of the specific camps, how you apply. We're running all applications through the member portal. So when athlete, you log into your USRowing member account, and you go to the Learn and Grow department, it lists all of the camp. That's where HP Winter Camp is listed right now, as well as we'll have the ID camps posted in there, and eventually the summer selection and selection development camps. More on that to come in 2 weeks. I know it's not an intuitive process, but we're trying to make it more streamlined for everyone. Let's see. Oh, Josy, this is interesting. Will there be any doubling up in the 8 and the 4, as has been done at some World Rowing Champs in the past, like the Romanians? Is that something we're looking to do?
No, like the Americans did, actually, in the past as well.
Yeah,
I think that if you look at it, the only thing is you try not to be exclusive. So I would argue that I prefer to not double up, because I want to give people the opportunity to compete. However, if we don't have enough athletes of the right level, we will double up.
Yeah, and I think I should have made a slide that said this. I think historically how we've approached both U19 and U23 is from a selection camp standpoint. I want to make sure I'm clear. Selection camp standpoint is we are committing to taking these boats. So it's the last couple of years, it's been an 8, a Cox 4, and a quad. And no matter what level of the athletes that we have at camp, we're definitely taking those boats. And what we're shifting to is this is the level of a U19 athlete, talent characteristics, this is speed, small boat results. This is what we're looking for. And then we will allocate those athletes from camp accordingly and put them in the best position possible to meet that 95% and ideally 97+% to be competitive at the world championships. And we don't want to be going to the world championships, bringing a knife to a gunfight type deal. We want to make sure that we have, the strongest boats possible. Hence why they have to make that minimum standard of 95%. Okay. Real quick, I'll answer this one. Why is World Rowing expected to eliminate the Cox 4 event from World Championships? There's rules in place about minimum participation levels from other countries, that there have to be a minimum number of entries multiple years in a row, and essentially that event has been a final only at both U19 and U23 for multiple years. So we're expecting that it will be eliminated. Josy, you're very familiar with this process. Any other comments on that?
No, it's a pity, but it's true.
Yeah. And it's not the only one at the U19 level. That is the only one being eliminated, but we are expecting multiple U23 lightweight events to also be eliminated. Let's see. Do athletes focused on the 8 need to think about the winter camp, or should they focus on ID camps? I would definitely think about winter camp, because it's a way for you to distinguish yourself as an individual in terms of your water results. Because as Josy was talking about before, it's really hard when you're in an 8 with 7 other people. It's very difficult, even if your boat's doing well and you're, making finals and winning regionals and doing things like that. It's really hard for us to attribute all that to you. You're definitely a contributing factor, but we don't really know how much are you contributing. So winter camp is an opportunity for you to show. We'll be in doubles, we'll be in pairs, depending on if you sweep or scull. It will be an opportunity for you to demonstrate what you could do as an individual.
The question about the age, adjusting the age levels. Yeah. So one of the problems is that people, because of the scholastic system and because of people rowing with in an under 19, so in youth, it's not aligned with under 19, under 18, under 17. We've got youth, and so that makes sometimes that combinations that row during the entire year can compete at the championships, and then one of them would qualify for under 19, the other one would not. So it's my intention to start a discussion about that. It's not that it's said that it's going to be adjusted, but I would want to start a discussion about whether it would make sense to have an under 19 and an under 21 category instead of the youth category, because I don't want to exclude people, but I just want to make sure that we compete at the same level. So it's a proposal to start a discussion about that. It's not that it's said that it's going to change.
Great. And I'll take this last one. Can you distinguish yourself as an athlete at ID camp just as easily as you can at HP winter camp? I would say no, because the reality is the winter camp is 3 days, multiple practices, lots of water time in Chula Vista. It's in January, but it's in Chula Vista in Southern California. You're going to be able to showcase yourself a lot better at that. If you, for whatever reason, you cannot attend, you're at the caliber, but you cannot attend that camp, we do recommend you still come to an ID camp. However, there's no water element at ID camp. ID camp is, we'll have 14 locations across the country. We will be doing some short tests, under a minute. We'll doing functional movement screening. That's really more about education. We will have a U19 coach at every single camp, which we're excited to offer. So there will be opportunity for you to be seen. Like obviously we'll watch how you row on the erg, but there is not a water element to that. So they are not, I would not equate them as the same experience. Okay. I do have one more slide that's relevant. Just so you're aware of what's coming up next, we already put the link to the next webinar that's happening 2 weeks from tonight. That will also be recorded. This webinar will be posted on the USRowing webinars page and the U19 team page, and as will this one if you're unable to make that live. One thing we wanted to bring up is that we do have a fall speed order that is open to all age categories, not just for seniors. Historically, this has mostly been entered by seniors, but it is open to U23 and U19 athletes as well. That's listed on Regatta Central. I believe November 1st, Friday, is the deadline to enter that event. And even though we're going to be running it all as one competition, so there'll be a time trial that then will seed an A, B, C, D, etc. final. So everyone will be mixed together. We will not have separate U19 or U23 races, but we will rank U19. You know, this is the top U19 finisher. This is the top U23 finisher after the fact. So wanted to make sure that's kind of, it's always been open, but we haven't advertised it to U19 and U23. And so we're starting to do that more with the intention that next fall that gets on everyone's radar much more. And then the HP Winter Camp application is due November 26th. A lot of people have been asking questions about that. Again, we will highlight that more in the webinar in 2 weeks from now. And finally, go ahead.
No, you've got one more question.
Oh, I do? Oh, okay. I wasn't necessarily going to answer. Where are the questions? I lost my questions. Oh, thank you. If you do the HP camp, should you also do an ID camp? Oh, great question. No, if you come to HP Winter, that's your ID camp. You do not have to do both. Great question. Great. Thank you, Josy, for bringing that attention. HP Winter Camp, when will you be notified? Pretty quickly. We're looking to finalize those within the first week of December, because we know people have to buy plane tickets. So we will be doing that. We will be turning that around very quickly. Okay. Lots of questions. This is really helping me with things I need to make sure that I have ready to talk about in 2 weeks for the camps webinar. We'll be detailing all the U19 camps. Maybe I need to budget that as a 90-minute webinar. But thank you very much, everyone, for your participation, for being here on a Wednesday evening, especially East Coast. I know it's late. If you're on the West Coast and you were able to be here live, thank you. I know the timing can be really challenging. And for those West Coasters who are watching the webinar, I know it's so hard for us to find a time that works for everyone, and we really appreciate everyone's time, and we thank you for listening.